Give these guys a hand as well. It's wonderful. You can be seated. It's wonderful to see you all this morning. Go ahead and find your way to Exodus chapter 14 with me. The book of Exodus chapter 14. It's amazing words to hear that God is for us. He's not against us. And God is for the Hebrew children in the book of Exodus. He was not against them. He was leading them. He was guiding them. Today I'm going to talk to you about the idea of moving forward. Often in life we do feel stuck, like we're maxed out of our potential or maxed out of the situation that it's brought us to. Looking back seems unhelpful. Looking forward offers little clarity. And at this point, we just feel like we're stuck. And you may feel like you're stuck this morning, perhaps in your job. You feel like that you're not doing exactly what the Lord has called you to do. You don't know exactly how to move forward with a specific situation, maybe with your interactions with another individual. You're sort of stuck. You don't know how to move forward with this situation as well. Well, the Hebrew children, here they are. They've walked out of Egypt. They've left Egypt. And they're now between the sea, the Red Sea, and the Pharaoh's army closing in. They're trapped. They're stuck. And God tells them very clearly to move forward in Exodus chapter 14. Verse 15, it says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Why do you cry to me?'" Now you have to remember, this is the point where they've said, "Moses, you've let us out here to die. You should have just buried us in Egypt. We would have been happier in Egypt." And God leads them out. The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground." Moses is crying out to the people. The Israelites, they're crying out to Moses. They're saying, "Moses, you've brought us here to die." And here's God's message. He says, move forward. Go forward. You think you're stuck. You think you're in a situation where Pharaoh's about to close in and he's about to kill you. But what you don't realize is that this situation is about to turn out very different than you expected. This situation is about to bring a miracle that you wouldn't normally understand. So God is about to move in a great way, in a grand way, in a way that you've never seen before. And so instead of whining, instead of crying about what's going on, you simply need to move forward with the command that the Lord has told you to accomplish. Sometimes in life, we're placed in that situation where we're either going to move forward or we're going to stay stuck exactly where we are at that particular moment. I'm amazed at this young lady by the name of Bethany Hamilton. She once ranked as the best amateur teen surfer in Hawaii. She lost her arm in a tiger shark accident. You may have saw the movie that was made about her or read about her in a magazine. Both her compassion and competitiveness, however, reached a new level soon after the attack. This has been about a decade and a half ago. Soon after the attack, she immediately began to raise money to restore a man's sight. She began to care, especially for those who were homeless and other needs as well. Referring to her competitiveness, there was a story in the USA Today that said, as always, Hamilton remains undaunted. She has told her father that if having only one arm proved detrimental to reaching the top in her field of competitive surfing, then she would take up playing soccer instead. Now that's some determination, isn't it? If this is going to affect me that much, I'll take up something totally different. They interviewed her pastor as well, a man by the name of Steve Thompson. He said that she's looking forward to the future. This is immediately after the shark attack. She's asking herself, how can I show the world that I still have life, that I still have joy, that I still have a future, that I have an underlying trust that God is in charge and that God cares for me. Now, here's a person, they lost their arm to a shark accident, competitive surfing. Of course, that affects balance and other moves as well in competitive surfing. But instead of being bitter about it, instead of thinking to themselves, this is it, my life's over, I can never go on, I can never move forward, they have an outlook on life that is joyful. They have an outlook on life that says, this is the point that God has brought me to. God has brought me to the point where I've lost my arm. Now, I can either stay at this point and think to myself that this is the end of God's plans. This is the end of what God has told me to do. Or I can move forward. I can press on. I can go forward and continue doing exactly what God has called me to do. Bethany Hamilton continued to move forward. She married, she had a couple of kids, and she continued moving forward with her surfing as well as business plans and helping those who are in need. And this is the choice. You can think to yourself, well, what have I lost in life? What difficulties have I faced in life? Well, have we lost an arm? Have we lost a limb? Have we lost part of our health? Have we lost a business? Have we lost a job? Have we lost a relationship? Have we lost a situation? Have we lost contact maybe with a parent or a child? At what point have we lost in life? And at what point has that stopped us from moving forward? Has it stopped us from pressing forward? I mean, here's a situation in the book of Exodus that they can't even see around. They have to think to themselves, there's no way to move forward. God, you're telling me to move forward, but all I see in front of me is the sea. All I see in front of me is where I can't go. All I see in front of me is more of a way to be stuck. And yet God says again, he says, the Lord said, why do you cry? Tell the people of Israel, go forward. God, keep doing what I've told you to do. Go forward instead of retreating to what's behind you, instead of retreating to what's familiar. Now, one of the things that keeps us from moving forward in life in general is that we prefer what's familiar. Now, you may think to yourself that you like change, but you probably don't. You may think to yourself that you like something new, but you probably don't like anything new to some degree. And you may think to yourself that you're not that type of person. I mean, you're an innovative person. You're a person that steps out. You're a person that looks forward. You're not just a creature of habit. You don't like what's familiar. We trick ourselves into believing that we don't like what's familiar in life, that we're not set in our ways. Sometimes we say that when someone gets to a certain age, they're just set in their ways. But at all ages, to some degree, we're just set in our ways. I don't know what your preferences are of going to the movie theater, but I've always had the preference in a movie theater that if I'm going to buy a ticket to go see a movie, and tickets are really expensive, but if I'm going to buy a ticket to go see a movie, I want to sit in the center. Now, I will count the seats. You may be like this as well. I will count the seats, and I want to sit in the center of the theater. Not only do I want to sit at the center of the theater, if the tickets are sold out, now they have assigned seating. If the tickets are sold out for the center of the theater, I won't even go. Not only do I want to sit at the center of the theater, but I want to sit on the back row of the theater. I mean, the screen's pretty large, and for some reason it can mess with my eyes, and I don't know if I follow all the movement that's going on, and so I want to sit at the very back. And if the very back seat is taken, then I won't go. Now, if it's $5 Tuesday, I might get the seat right in front of the very back, But typically, I want the seat that's at the very back of the row as well. And so that's sort of being set in your ways. Well, in college, I went to the movie with some friends fairly often. And that was before there was assigned seating. You couldn't just go to Fandango and order stuff online. That was before assigned seating. And so you got there, you sat in the seat that wasn't taken, and that's where you were. And so I would go with a group of 10 or so friends. My 10 or so friends, they would get there about 10 minutes before the movie started. Well, I got there about 40 minutes before the movie started, because I thought to myself, I'm going to get to the movie theater 40 minutes beforehand. I'm going to be the first person in line, and then I'm going to go to the back of the theater, and I'm going to sit down in the center of the entire theater, and that's the seat that I want. So I got there 40 minutes early. So I'm there 40 minutes early. I'm waiting in line. I go into the movie theater. I sit down. It's still dark. There's still people cleaning up. I've beat the entire crowd. I've got the seat that I want. And then some of my friends come in. And this is what places you in a difficult situation if you're going to act like Jesus or not. So some of my friends come in, and then more friends come in, and the movie theater begins to fill up. It's a Friday night. Everybody's going to the movie. And finally it gets to a point that another group comes in. And one of my buddies looks over to me, and he says, Lucas, can you scoot down? And I think to myself, I was here 40 minutes before the movie started. You were here 10 minutes beforehand, and now I'm supposed to scoot down. And so I give up. I give in. I was with some college friends who were also going to seminary as well, and I thought, okay, this time I'll act like Jesus, so I'll scoot down. Then some more friends come in, and then he looks at me again and says, can you scoot down one more time? And some more friends come in. And finally, I'm at the very end of the row, and I think to myself, I showed up 40 minutes early to get the seat that I wanted. Now I'm at the end of the road. You know why I wanted to do that? Because I'm familiar with what I like. You know why? You may think to yourself, you come to church. You sit where you sit, don't you? Some of you sit in the same place every week. Now, some of you think to yourself, I don't sit in the same place every week, but you do sit in the same place every week because I stand here and I look at you every week, and I can tell if you're here or not because I see that the seat's empty. Think about that. I know where you all sit so much that I know I can take up attendance right now, because I know who's not here because of what seat's empty. And you're thinking, well, I'm not. That's crazy to want that much familiarity. Some of you are looking at me like I'm crazy about the movie theater. And then when I point out that it's the same as the church, you're like, well, okay, that makes sense. Just a little bit more. But the whole idea is we like what's familiar. We like routine. We like what's comfortable as well. And here God is saying to them, you're going to do something very uncomfortable. You're going to do something very unfamiliar. And what's amazing about this is that if we move forward in life, part of moving forward in life, part of moving forward to do what God has called us to do is moving forward to stuff that is extremely unfamiliar. Faith, I wrote this down, faith is trading the familiar for the unknown. Faith is trading routines for risks. Faith is trading answers for questions. Well, I have all the answers I want in life. Well, if you're going to have faith, it means you're probably going to wind up with some questions. Well, I'm really familiar with my routine. Well, if you're going to have faith, it means you're going to step out of the familiarity of the routine and you're going to risk something. Well, I really like what I know. Don't we like what we know? We like what we know right now. We like what we can see. And if you're going to have faith to move forward in life, sometimes if you're going to have faith to do what God has called you to do, it means that you're going to become familiar with the unknown. Or you're going to become okay with the unknown. Because sometimes doing what God has called us to do is just riding on the wave and riding through the doors that God opens, even though you don't know how He's going to open them, and even though you don't know what He's going to do. We're a church right now. We are a body of believers right now because we became familiar with the unfamiliar. We rode on a wave that we didn't know where it was going. We walked through a door we didn't know that was going to open, and we did all that knowing that God was going to do something, even though all you might be able to see is the Pharaoh and the Red Sea. God can still do something great if we just walk forward and we just move forward. You see what I'm talking about? And He says, you move forward. You step out in faith. And we become familiar instead with the past, and we become familiar instead with routines. And part of retreating to the familiar, which is exactly what the Israelites want to do, is that we recreate the past, and we think that the past is something more significant than it really is. We all have our glory days and the things that we were familiar with, and many of us in times we think to ourselves, if I could have my glory day again, what would that be? What would the glory day in your life be? It may be right now, but what would the glory day in your life be? Well, this is what I used to be the star basketball player. I used to be the star football player. I don't know if you are or not, but you might not be now. And it's kind of saying you got to move forward with life. Or I used to have this job, or I used to be in this position. And so, we live with pride. We live with expectation. We live with a view of life based upon where we were in the past and not where we are right now. When God says you need to focus on where you are right now, and you need to get ready for what God is doing right now instead of just holding on to what's familiar in the past. There were Academy Award-winning actor Charles Heston. He once told this story. Of course, he played Moses. That's pretty convenient and a message about Moses, isn't it? But Charles Heston told this story about how he's not always had rave reviews, or how he had not always had rave reviews. He said that he learned the most valuable single truth about criticism from another actor by the name of Laurence Olivier. He said we had done a Broadway play. It wasn't Shakespeare or anything, but it was a new type of play, and the critics slaughtered us. Before the opening night, they said that we were doomed. They said it was going to be the most terrible play that had ever been performed. And we did the play, and the play still got bad reviews. So 40 minutes later, after the opening night of the play, Charles Heston says, me and Laurence Olivier, we were in a diner, and we were sitting there, and he said, I had opened up a bottle of brandy, and I was a young man then, and I was trying to get out of my mind the criticism that just had occurred, And Charles Heston said I was going to say something really philosophical, and so I said, I suppose you learn how to forget the bad performances. That's what he told Oliver Lawrence. I guess you learn how to forget the bad performances. Oliver gripped my elbow, Charles Heston says, and he said, Laddie, what's much harder and far more important is that you learn how to forget the good ones. Isn't that interesting? You don't learn how to forget the bad ones. You learn how to forget the good ones, or the good times in life. The Israelites, they looked back at Egypt and they said, well, we had some pretty good times. I mean, there was food, there was shelter. We had some pretty good times. And so he's saying that if you're ever going to move forward in life, it's not just about forgetting the bad performances. I mean, we can think about the bad performances in life. We can think about the bad situations that have occurred in life as well. But it's also about forgetting the good ones, the good events in life, and the high points of our lives that hold us back and keep us from moving forward to what the Lord has called us to do. And regardless of how hard the Lord is working in their hearts, they still look at Egypt as their home. They still look at Egypt as the place where they're supposed to be. And if they're ever going to look ahead, they're ever going to step forward, press on, move forward to what God has called them to do, they have to let go of the good parts of Egypt. You may think to yourself, well, Egypt can't have that many good parts, but in their minds, Egypt is good. I've said before, in our minds, many of times, Egypt is good. A bad situation, it's good. A difficult circumstance, it's good. We look, it's always in hindsight, and this is, it's proven statistically, it's fact. We look back and we remember things often better than they were. And sometimes we look back and we remember things worse than they really were. But that's significant, that we look back and we remember things better than they were. And one of our inabilities to be content is because we sort of glorify the events of the past, thinking that those events were actually much better than they really were. That's why, now think about this, that's why all of you look back and you think to yourself, if I could just be back in middle school or high school again, those were the best days of my life. And that's why every kid going to school this fall looks at themselves and says to themselves, if I could just be out of school right now, if I could just be in college or just be an adult, I would be the happiest kid. I would be the happiest person ever. It's because we glorify the things that are not. And moving forward is realizing that we can't just settle with what's familiar. Moving forward also is realizing that we have to move forward until the Lord shows us what's next. We think to ourselves, well, what's the plan? I might have asked Moses that. I like to think strategically. Moses, what's the plan here? You're taking us to the Red Sea. You know where the Red Sea ends. What's the plan? I mean, what's going to happen? We like to know the plan. We like to know what's going to happen in the future. And we think to ourselves, well, I would move forward. I would step forward. I would press on. I'd get on with my life. But God, what's the plan? What's going to happen here? And moving forward, pressing forward is more about faith to actually take the step than faith to say to God, God, what's the plan? What's going on? I mean, God's got a plan, doesn't he? God knows what's going to happen. God knows how events are going to unfold. But God doesn't have to tell us. That's hard for us to realize. I mean, we think to ourselves, God, show me the plan. Here's the blueprint for my life. I mean, some of you may have wrote down in a book all your life goals and all your life plans. And I don't know what God does with those. Maybe God looks at those and he says, well, these are great ideas. Maybe God looks at those and he says, well, that's a nice little book you got there. It's not what's going to happen. And we have all these plans, and you say, well, God, if I just knew, God, if I just knew the sea was going to part, I would have been right out there with them. I wonder if there was some straggler behind in Egypt, who didn't go with the rest of the Israelites, and he's probably standing on top of his house. He's looking at the events. He sees the Pharaoh charging in. He sees the Israelites stuck. He sees the Red Sea, and then the sea parts. And I wonder if he thought to himself, well, God, if you told me that was going to happen, God, if you'd said, if I knew what the plan was, God, now what? I'm stuck in Egypt. I'm staying in my house. They're going to come back. They're going to hate me even more because I didn't go. God, why didn't you just tell me what the plan was? And part of faith is taking the next step, regardless of the fact if you know what the plan is, or if you know what the plan is, it's moving forward. It's moving on with what God has told you to do, regardless of the circumstance. It's the step that wins the race. Don't you love Aesop's fable about the turtle, the name Slow and Steady? You know, the story of the rabbit and the tortoise, and they're running along, and the rabbit falls asleep, and the tortoise keeps going forward and moving forward step after step after step. And then by the time the rabbit wakes up and is taunting the turtle, this slow turtle's never going to beat me. And he looks ahead, and the turtle is walking across the finish line. And the rabbit thinks, well, how on earth could he have won? And the whole story is this: slow and steady wins the race. One step forward wins the race. One move forward. Just take a step. Move forward. Do what God has called you to do. Accomplish what God has called you to accomplish. When Moses told the Israelites they were leaving Egypt, he took a step forward. He said, I'm going. Now, at one point, Moses could have looked back. That would have been really interesting, wouldn't it have? Moses could have looked back, and there could have been no one behind him. He could have been the only one going forward. But he still moved forward. He took the step that God called him to take. And moving forward, pressing on, is taking the step regardless if you know the outcome of the events. It's the slow and steady step regardless of what's going to happen. Moving forward is also moving forward even if you don't understand how. Now, you may be at a place where you think, well, I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to move forward in my career. I don't know how to move forward in my relationships. I don't know how to move forward working with my kids, my grandkids, or my children. I don't know how to move forward in my school or college or whatever it may be. I have no idea how to move forward. I don't know what God wants me to do. I don't know the next steps that the Lord wants me to take. And still, regardless of this, they're moving forward. And regardless of being held down, the idea is pressing forward, setting your eyes on the goal. I think of the Apostle Paul. Paul had killed Christians. He had ran from the Lord. He had turned from the Lord. And then God called him. And there had to be a point where Paul said, oh, how do you expect me to move forward, Lord? How do you expect me to press on? Do you remember when Paul first went to the early Christians and they said, this guy's going to kill us too? I mean, he's going to take us out. They rejected him. They didn't think that God was going to use him. They thought that he was a traitor of the faith. They thought that that he was going to rat them out and send them to Nero Caesar, and they were all going to die as well. Paul was rejected early on. Paul had to prove himself. He had to prove that God was really working in his heart and his life. And at any moment, Paul could have said, okay, that's it, that's too much. Killed Christians. I was there approving the murder of Stephen, if you read Acts chapter 7. Can't do what God has called me to do. And we're good at making excuses of why we can't do exactly what God has called us to do. And he could have said, well, that's it, I'm done. God can't use me now. I can't move forward. I have no way to press forward. And instead, the Apostle Paul, like the turtle, slow and steady, he took a step, he pressed forward. And in Philippians chapter 3, listen to his words. Paul says, but the one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind me, he had to, couldn't think about it, and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. I press forward. I press forward. What Paul is saying there is I found forgiveness for my past mistakes. I found forgiveness for the things that hold me down. This one thing I do, I press forward. The people who rejected me as an apostle, I still press forward doing what God has called me to do. The people who would not forgive me for being a part of the attack of Christianity, I press forward, forgiving and doing what God has called you to do. And there may be people in your life who turn you down. There may be people in your life who don't give you the opportunity. There may be people in your life who hold on to unforgiveness. There may be people in your life who turn away from you. And what are you going to do? Are you going to wallow in that? Or are you going to press on? Are you going to move on doing what the Lord has called you to do? Paul says, I continue going. I continue moving as well. Moving forward, it's keeping your eye on the goal. He says, I press on toward the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. In Exodus chapter 14, the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel. Tell them to go forward. Tell them to look ahead. Tell them to look at what I've told them to look at. What did God told them was going to happen? He says, I'm going to take you out of Egypt. I'm going to take you to the promised land. That's the vision. That's the goal. You're going to the promised land. You're going to where I've told you you're going to go. So he says, look at that. Eye has not seen, nor ear has heard what God has in store for those who love him. We don't understand the plan. We don't understand what's going on, but we look toward that. Therefore, we do not lose heart, even though the outer person is decaying, even though the outer person is wasting away. The inward person is being renewed day by day. Therefore, we don't look at the things which are seen. We look at the things which are unseen, the things which are eternal. We don't look at the temporary. We look at the eternal. We don't look at the physical. We look at the spiritual. We don't look at what's now. We look at what's in the future. And so he says, you focus on what's ahead of you. You focus on what's in front of you. You focus on what God has promised is going to happen. I was interested to read about an individual by the name of Florence Chadwick. At age 34, this person, on July 4th, this is 1952, this person waded into the water off the Catalina Island, began to swim 21 miles toward California. If she finished, she would be the first woman ever to accomplish this task. The water was ice cold, the fog was so heavy that Florence could hardly see the boats in her own party. Sharks often began to attack Florence as she swam, and men armed with rifles and boats surrounding her had to drive them off. Now, we would have been like, this is it, we're not swimming anymore. But she continued. But the constant numbing cold water was her toughest problem. 15 hours after she began, think about it, 15 hours after she began, she asked to be taken out of the water. Her muscles were sluggish and unresponsive due to the coldness of the water. Her mother and trainer alongside in the boat told her that they were near the land and said to her, press on, continue moving forward. You're almost there, don't quit. But as she looked ahead, all she could see was the dense fog, so she gave up and asked to be taken out of the water. When they pulled her out of the water, she was only half a mile from California's coast. Now think about that, half a mile from California's coast. Only a small fraction of her journey was incomplete. She almost did it. I mean, she was almost there. You think it's starting 21 miles away, 15 hours, being half a mile from the shore. Later, when Florence's body began to thaw, the failure hit her. To a reporter, she blurted out, look, I'm not excusing myself, but if I could have seen the land, I would have made it. If I could have seen the land, I would have made it. If it weren't for the fog, I would have made it. If it weren't for the temperature, I would have made it. That last half a mile, if I could have saw the land, I would have made it. You know what God tells the Israelites outside of the Exodus? He says, you need to keep your eye on the land, the promised land. What you see right now is the Red Sea. What you see right now is the Pharaoh behind you. What you need to see is the promised land which is in front of you. And for some of us this morning, what you see right now is Egypt, slavery. What you see right now is the difficult situation. What you see right now is the trouble and the trial and the problem. What you don't see is that there's a little bit of fog in front of you, and about a half a mile ahead is the land that God has promised to you. Would you stand with me this morning?